The NFL give it and the NFL take it away. Cody and I discuss Bill O'Brien and Deshaun Watson costing the Houston Texans a fifth-round draft pick.
And to tie it all in, we want to develop a great team here that we can deliver wins to the city of Houston. We want to deliver a championship here to the city of Houston, and that's what it'll be about.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Friday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you are subscribed to the Locked On Texans podcast on all of the major podcasting platforms, including YouTube as well. I'm John Hickman, of course, joined by Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis, who also happens to be a credential media member in the city of Houston. Got Brandon K. Scott joining the show today. Cody and K. Scott will have a fun conversation as always. But before we dive into the K. Scott talk, Cody, the entity himself, the Lord give it, the Lord take it away.
Gosh.
So the Houston Texans, the NFL announced that the Houston Texans will lose out on their 2023 fifth-round draft pick and also receive a $175,000 fine for violations of league policy during the 2020 league year. Now, the 2020 league year just so happens to be the same year the entire world just kind of stopped. That was the COVID year. The violation stemmed from how the Texans covered the cost of alternate workout sites while team facilities were closed during the COVID-19 lockdowns, and those alternate workout sites just so happened to be for then quarterback Deshaun Watson. Listen, I'm not, Cody. I'll give the floor over to you momentarily, but I'm not too worried. Honestly, it was a fifth-round draft pick. Houston still has 4 sixth-round draft picks, and listen, unless Houston doesn't trade Brandon Cooks or maybe use some of their current picks to trade back and acquire more draft picks in this year, or maybe there's a player that we're not talking about that Houston can move on from, I do see Houston getting another pick back in this year's draft.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, we talked about this a couple of days ago. You know, Nick Caserio is going to will his deal into more or possibly even less draft picks. It's a fifth-round draft pick. You know, fifth-round draft picks can be either hit or miss. For those of you guys out there, well, yeah, from 1 to what's Mr. Irrelevant number 270 something,
something crazy.
Yeah, something crazy. But you know, to understand whether or not, you know, how big of a deal this is, Texans losing fifth-round draft pick. Last year, the Houston Texans did have an opportunity to draft both Thomas Booker and TQ in the fifth round last year. And both of those guys, as of right now, are starting to establish themselves as foundational pieces for this organization. But, John, it just so happens that we are talking about those two guys, and go ahead and throw Jack Easterby in this as well, because a couple of days ago you called them the holy trinity of bad decision makers, and this is what this is once again. And what I can't get over is the fact that you telling me, and of course, literally, I think the world literally started shutting down like 3 years ago today, as a matter of fact. So since we sit here talking, because this was early May when Rudy Gobert touched all over mics and, you know, ended up getting COVID, and then all hell broke loose after that. By the way, that cost me an opportunity to cover University of Houston at their conference tournament that year, and unfortunately never went back to UH. But with all that being said, I find it very hard to believe, and at this time, the relationship with Deshaun and the organization was still pretty good. I find it hard to believe that you telling me that the Houston Texans was the only team in the league that went out their way to make sure that their top players, their top quarterback, still have an opportunity to work out in the offseason, especially during that time when the team's facility, i.e. NRG Stadium, was closed. Now, my next biggest theory is I wonder how much of the off-field shenanigans that was taking place kind of doled the league into, let's see what was really going on.
Yeah, and so the funny thing about it, they were fined $175,000, right? As I mentioned, lost a 5th-round draft pick. They were simply paying $26,000. So the league came up big time, and the Texans lost out big time. They were paying $26,000 for Deshaun Watson to train at a local facility. Maybe they didn't go through the right.
The Houstonian.
Maybe they didn't go through the right communication protocols. That's important, especially during that time where nobody knew what to make of COVID, and so
yeah, I know, right?
I'm sure that the league had protocols and a process set up in place for teams to go through. Maybe that's what happened with Houston. In other news, the Houston Texans were awarded a compensational 7th-round draft pick due to the CBA agreement that states if in any league year the number of compensatory selections awarded is less than the number of clubs in the league, which is 32, an additional number of selection choices shall be awarded to clubs based upon selection order. This year, 30 compensatory selections were awarded to 13 clubs based upon the formula that I just provided. 2 clubs, Chicago and Houston, was awarded additional picks in this NFL draft. Chicago was awarded the 41st pick in the 7th round. The Houston Texans were awarded the 42nd pick in the 7th round as well. And also, Kenyon Green underwent arthroscopic knee surgery, and he is expected to be back for the team's voluntary offseason workout starting April 3rd. And before we move on and have that fun conversation with Brandon K. Scott of 610 Sports Radio, definitely want to let you guys know about Built Bar, what makes Built Bar so good and what makes Built Bar so, I don't know how to say it, man, like worth it. Built Bar is covered in 100% real chocolate. That's number one. They have amazing flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. And now they are super convenient. You no longer have to wait for your box to get delivered to your door. You can run into your local Walmart or Sam's Club today to get yours. And also, only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein. You cannot beat that. It's healthy. It tastes great. Have it on the go. Have it for your lunch. Have it for a midday snack. Whatever you want to do with your Built Bar, you can do that because it's the best option on the market for you.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Friday installment of Locked On Texans. And if it's Friday, you already know we got our guy, our brother, Mr. Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610. Brandon, what's going on, man?
Man, I'm living good, man. Anytime I get to sit here and break bread with y'all on the Locked On Texans podcast, get to talk to the Locked On Texans audience. We was just talking before we started recording how this podcast has really taken off over the last couple of years. And y'all really have a real fun community to engage with and to get the thoughts and opinions of other people. It's always interesting. So I'm glad to be here, man, and be amongst the people.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And just want to thank you as well, because you are another reason why we have been able to, build and grow this podcast. Me and John was talking not too long ago. Like, we don't even know when we literally just started having B. Scott on every week. It was like you was on, and the next thing you know, we basically made it a weekly thing.
Yeah. Well, when it makes sense, when it makes sense, it just makes sense, right? What's understood doesn't have to be explained.
Yes, sir. And speaking of something that makes sense, there's something going on right now, some rumors going on that I don't think should make that much sense, but in a weird way, it kind of does. And of course, let's jump right into it. Jimmy Garoppolo to the Houston Texans, free agency start next week. What are your thoughts about the possibility of that happening?
Yeah, I think the possibility of it happening, Cody, definitely makes sense. And I don't think that means I have to like it. I can tell you right now that I don't like everything that makes sense, and everything that I like doesn't necessarily make sense. So I think it's important to distinguish the two. It absolutely makes sense. Jimmy Garoppolo is a free agent quarterback. The Texans need a quarterback, whether it's a starter or a backup. They need. We've made fun of it a little bit on Sports Radio 610 of how they've kind of had this party line. You've been there for this, Cody, where they're just like, well, we've only got one quarterback on the roster, so we obviously have to go get two. So it makes sense that Jimmy Garoppolo, being a free agent quarterback, could be one of the two quarterbacks that they acquire either through free agency or in the draft. And then obviously we know the connections. I'm sure y'all have been over this, and we all know what the connections are because they're right there before us. Jimmy Garoppolo, even going back to the New England days, has ties to Nick Caserio, the general manager for the Texans. And then, of course, more recently, he's got ties not only with DeMeco Ryans, the head coach, but Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator for the Texans now, who was the passing game coordinator last year for the 49ers. And, of course, you got to remember Jimmy Garoppolo did play. Things ended kind of awkwardly and weirdly with the 49ers, and they always were weird over the last year with Jimmy G and the San Francisco 49ers. But he did play for them, and Bobby Slowick was, by all accounts, a key member of that team. So, or of that coaching staff, I should say. So we know what the connections are for all of those reasons that I just laid out. It certainly makes sense in terms of whether you like it or whether it's something that you would want to get behind as an idea or as a concept. I think that all depends on what they do next, or what the terms are, I should say, of a Jimmy Garoppolo deal. Like, what are we talking about exactly? Are we talking about Jimmy Garoppolo being the quarterback of this team in the way that Derek Carr is the quarterback now of the New Orleans Saints, the way that Geno Smith now has been extended or given a new contract with the Seattle Seahawks, and he is the quarterback there? Or are we talking about a bridge situation where that's closer to what Tyrod Taylor was for the Texans a couple of years ago, where it's like, yeah, he's the veteran guy who comes in as the starter, but there's a rookie who we really want to look at. There's a rookie who we really think we might want to invest in. And when we feel like that time is here for us to do that, we'll go ahead and do that. You know, I said on Sports Radio 610, I think it was on Thursday, that this could be, if they do it right, it could be like a better version of the Tyrod Taylor-Davis Mills combination, where in Jimmy Garoppolo, you have a higher end free agent quarterback, and in the number 2 overall pick, or wherever exactly you pick a quarterback, preferably obviously in the first round, you have a better prospect than Davis Mills. So hopefully that's what they do. Or at the very least, let me rewind that. Hopefully, if they get Jimmy Garoppolo, that's what they do, that they also invest heavily in a quarterback and don't pay Jimmy Garoppolo closer to the Derek Carr and Geno Smith realm because of what that would signal about what he means and what that means for the future. And, you know, on the draft side, don't go on the low end, like on the 3rd round, sort of Davis Mills sort of aspect, right? Like the balance of it needs to be that Jimmy Garoppolo's money and role is closer to what a Tyrod Taylor is or was, and then the rookie quarterback is given even more of a leash and drafted higher, obviously, than Davis Mills. So that's the hope if they actually do it. And I feel like that's what the reporting has been, that even if they did draft Jimmy Garoppolo, that wouldn't stop them from wanting to look at a quarterback high. But then the question is for you there is, does Jimmy Garoppolo view himself more as a Geno Smith, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones type, seeing guys get paid and thinking like, hey, man, I don't have to settle for that. So to me, that's what the relevant question is. And it'll be interesting to see over the next several days or so what the answer is.
B. Scott, if I'm being 100% honest, my biggest fear is them signing Jimmy Garoppolo and letting that divert them from drafting either CJ or Bryce, because I'm looking at this from a standpoint of, I'm a believer in a team, especially a young rebuilding team like the Texans, bringing in veterans. And trust me, after covering the Texans and the Rockies over the last 2 seasons, it's very important for teams to have veterans. But with that being said, I would prefer the Texans go out and sign a veteran. Me and John talked about this a couple of weeks ago, like Case Keenum, a veteran that's just going to be there to provide a lot of support and a lot of help to someone like a Bryce, someone like a CJ, and even Davis Mills to a certain extent, because regardless of who comes in and out that quarterback room, the one guy that's still on the roster is going to be Davis Mills. My biggest issue is I don't want to see them go out and sign Jimmy Garoppolo and pass up on an opportunity to draft either CJ or Bryce, because I truly believe that CJ and Bryce are the top two quarterbacks that from week one you can plug them in right away and they're going to be able to play for you. Now, I'm not sitting here and saying that week one I'm expecting them to go from a team that averaged 17 points per game, winning 3 games, to 27 points per game. You're on the fast track of winning 13 games. But I feel like in order to get the best out of those two guys, it will be much more beneficial to go out there and start them from week one. But at the same time, it's like if they get Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm wondering, do they have their eyes set on Anthony Richardson?
That's an interesting look at it. I look, okay, so let's back up for a second before we go Anthony Richardson. I'm out on any plan, okay, just for the record here. I'm out on any plan that includes passing up on Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, okay, if they're there. Whether that's Jimmy Garoppolo, whether that's Anthony Richardson, and I understand the fascination with Anthony Richardson. I share it. Let me be clear about that too. I feel like he is a really fascinating prospect just from a physical standpoint. And if you feel like you can coach something like that up, like I wouldn't draft Anthony Richardson personally because I don't have the expertise to fix Anthony Richardson. I don't know exactly what the deal is, what's wrong with him and how to fix him. Mm-hmm. Maybe a coach or a GM and a scouting department does. That's the difference between them and me, right? Like I'm not going to pretend to know what I don't. And my deal with Anthony Richardson is, man, there's something there, but there's also something missing and I don't know how to fix it. And I also don't know for sure that the people that would be in charge of fixing it here know how to fix it. I don't know that for sure either. I don't have anything that indicates that. Now, if they were to do it, that would be them signaling to us that they think they can, right? That they think they can work with it. But I feel much more comfortable with the prospects that we already know about. What you just described, the case that you just made for those two guys, right? That those are clearly the top 2 picks. You have a top, or the top 2 quarterback prospects. You have a top 2 pick. Go ahead and draft one of those guys. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be super difficult or complicated. It doesn't. So I'm against any idea that starts with that or that includes passing on those guys. You hear people talk about, hey, if you can't get Bryce or you can't get Stroud, if you can't get one or the other because you prefer one or the other, trade down or pick a defensive player. Do something else. Don't reach for the quarterback. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like in either case, whether it's Stroud or Young that's available to you at 2, I don't feel like that would be reaching. I feel like it could be settling depending on which quarterback you prefer. Like it could land that maybe they like CJ Stroud the best and they get him anyway. Mm-hmm. It could be that CJ Stroud goes number 1 and Bryce Young is the one that they like best. Like say Indianapolis for whatever reason doesn't like that Bryce Young is small and they like CJ Stroud better. They go and take him. And Bryce Young is the guy that the Texans like the best and he still lands to them. Like it could go like either way. But I feel like that the math is in their favor and that they should pick one of the top 2 picks. I'm out on any idea like that. You present the Anthony Richardson possibility, I would be shocked, Cody, as fascinating of a prospect as he is.
Yeah, he is.
I would be shocked if they did. Like they're really big on math and analytics and they understand the value of a risk reward analysis. And the risk reward of like unless you're trying to tell me that they might take Anthony Richardson later in the first round, think that he's there or something like that. The risk reward of taking Anthony Richardson at 2 and passing on either Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, who are undoubtedly just flat out better quarterback prospects, that would shock me. That would shock me as much as I like what Anthony Richardson brings to the table. And as cool as it would be to think that maybe this coaching staff could be the one to unlock whatever it is in Anthony Richardson. Like I'm interested and so somewhat fascinated by that idea. I don't know if I believe in it, but I'm curious about it. But curiosity would kill the cat here, man. Go ahead and do the smart and prudent thing, man. Don't get too cute. You know, to me, if that's what they're looking at, that to me is getting too cute. Now, could Jimmy Garoppolo though, on this conversation, still be the bridge quarterback for whoever you draft? Certainly, you know, whether it's Stroud, Young, or Richardson. You know, he could be. I was talking with Landry Locker about this on In the Loop. We actually didn't talk about this on air, but I mentioned it before the show or between shows. That, man, what if he could be a poor man? What if he could be a rich man's Tyrod Taylor, like I mentioned earlier, and a poor man's Alex Smith as the transition guy to the next quarterback, and hopefully that quarterback is, you know, better than Davis Mills, even if he's not as good as Patrick Mahomes.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Friday installment of Locked On Texans. B. Scott, you talked about whether or not this coaching staff could be a coaching staff that can actually unlock this great potential in Anthony Richardson. Early on in the week, we all had an opportunity to hear from Bobby Slowick and Matt Burke, the new offensive and defensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. B. Scott, what are your thoughts? New coaches, new coordinators in towns, new everything with the 2023 Houston Texans.
I'm here for it, man. Like I'm excited about it. I'm optimistic about it. I don't have any reason not to be. I don't have any reason to be negative at this point. Like if I was gonna say something negative, it would be, you know, you could say though Bobby Slowick hasn't called plays before. Well, somebody got to start at some point, right? DeMeco Ryans ain't never been a head coach, and I ain't hold that against him, right? I was really excited about that and still am. So, and maybe even the newness of it is part of the excitement. I wouldn't be afraid to admit that. You know, the fact that you feel like, you know, I talked about earlier about could the coaching staff unlock you know, a certain player, that being Anthony Richardson, but you know, this coaching staff itself still needs to be unlocked because it's not necessarily, you know, a proven one. You know, Matt Burke has a lot of experience in the league, but he's coming from being a defensive line coach last year and was a game management coach, you know, for the Arizona Cardinals last year, and was a game management coach for the Jets the year before that, and Robert Saleh's first year with the Jets. And so it'll be really interesting to see what his imprint is on the defense because, well, two things with that, right? He's a defensive line coach. Where do the Texans need help at? Defensive line. He was a game management coach. Well, I don't know what DeMeco Ryans' game management is going to look like. I mean, I can assume and hope that it's going to be good, but he's a first-year head coach. I have no idea. And so you have an experienced assistant coach who has been a game management coordinator before, or a game management coach before, for a first-year head coach who came out of the same system as the one that is coaching now. That to me is interesting. You know, I feel like that is it feels like a good fit, even though those two guys haven't exactly worked together before, I don't think. They just got a lot of common ties and common contacts, I guess you could say. And then with Bobby Slowick, that's the more intriguing one, because you could say, because on one hand, because the offense has just been so bad. You know, the offense has just been so bad. And, you know, Bill O'Brien's offense, it felt like just never fully reached the hype that I felt like it came with at the time. You know, Bill O'Brien was billed as a quarterback whisperer and, you know, the next big thing at the time, you know, as far as like offensive minds. And that just didn't really pan out. Bill O'Brien was an average coach. He was an okay coach, horrible general manager, average coach, you know. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't anything that necessarily stood out. Now, and I say that he's still well respected in the game in a lot of places as an offensive mind, but it just, with the Texans, it never reached what it felt like it was supposed to be, you know. And then you move on from that. Tim Kelly is an extension of that. You move on from that last year, and Pep Hamilton was a complete disappointment, a complete flop last year. So you're like, okay, this offense hasn't really been good for a while, save for a couple of years here and there with Deshaun Watson, and a lot of that, if you go back and watch, was Deshaun Watson and you had a couple of players, The offense itself wasn't really all that good. The rushing offense has been bad. Like, it's been in the bottom 3, I feel like, the last 3 years, if I'm correct on that. And it's been like in the 20s for every year the last decade except one, which I think might have been 2019 or 2018, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it might have been 2019 when they had Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson.
Right. But it's been in the 20s, the rush in terms of like, and our guy John, I know John isn't a big fan of DVOA stat, but just in terms of efficiency, if you're trying to just like how it runs, it's been in the bottom. And you could use, if you don't have to use that stat, just find the stat that you like, and they'll be somewhere toward the bottom.
Exactly.
Okay? So, I mean, it like, and what do we know about this offense and this scheme? It's like, it's one that features running backs and is predicated on running backs being versatile in his own blocking scheme. And so how does Bobby Slowick, how does he play in all of that in terms of like what he's absorbed from Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, working under Mike McDaniel, like for the last couple of years, basically, before Mike McDaniel got his job, he was Mike McDaniel's assistant. He was Mike LaFleur's assistant before that. The younger LaFleur, the one that just got fired with the Jets, his assistant before that. Handpicked to coach, by the way, by Mike Shanahan. Like, you got to remember, his dad coached with Mike Shanahan, Bobby Slowick's dad. So the Slowick family and the Shanahan family are family friends. And so he's like just having dinner one night, graduating from college, having dinner with the Shanahans. And Mike Shanahan's like, hey, what are you going to do after you graduate? What are you going to do? He's like, well, I studied biomedical engineering or something like that. It's like, I think I'm going to go into that field. And Mike Shanahan's like, you should get into coaching. And here we are. Like, he did, and 10 years later or so, here he is. So, or I think a little bit more than that, but roughly 10 plus years later or so, here he is. So I want to see what it looks like. I'm excited about it. I hope that the plan isn't just to go like what you said, just Jimmy G and be deterred from drafting a quarterback at high, either Bryce Young or CJ Stroud if they're available to you. But I don't think that's the case. I certainly hope that's not the case, and I don't think that is the case. So, with Garoppolo, it just comes down to what it's going to cost, and it's because of back on the coaches. It's because of Bobby Slowick, I think, and DeMeco Ryans and the cast that they've assembled that this whole Jimmy Garoppolo thing kind of makes sense, even if we're uncomfortable with it. But whatever they do at quarterback, I'm excited to see what Bobby Slowick turns into.
Brandon, really quick, last question before I let you go. Every time we think we done with the Deshaun Watson saga, it continues. On Thursday, there was a ruling. Deshaun Watson cost this franchise a 5th-round pick and got fined about the secret off-field workout place he was going to work out. You know why I'm using these quotation marks, because we ain't got to get into some other unfortunate events that may or may not have happened, may not have been forced to happen. But really quick, what are your thoughts? Deshaun, the Texans, how long is it going to be until we are finally over this saga?
Well, I would first step back for a second and describe it a little differently when you say Deshaun Watson cost them a 5th-round pick, and I certainly understand why you would say that, because it was, their shenanigans.
Which what I would say, I know so good and well, basically, literally 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when the whole COVID stuff was taking place, literally, I want to say that's when the world started shutting down around this time 3 years ago. I know that the Houston Texans were not the only team paying for their top clients to go other places to work out. It's just unfortunate because of some off-field allegations is now playing into this situation.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's always a way to cook the books and a way to be smart with your bookkeeping, and how you pay players and how you allocate your money. People way smarter than me to deal with cooking books understand how to do that sort of thing. And that's why I was objecting to the point about Deshaun, because while this is about Deshaun and he is the headliner in this, or like the most famous person involved in all of this, to me, this is more about how the Texans were mismanaged at the time. Because notice in their statement, Cody, how they admit to not realizing that they weren't supposed to pay for the accommodation, whether they were supposed to actually dock it from the player's pay. So all they had to do was essentially either, this is my takeaway of not being a financial expert, they could have done one or two things. Taking the money out of Deshaun Watson's pay. Like instead of paying $26,000 for Deshaun Watson, take $26,000 out of Deshaun Watson's check. Is he gonna miss $26,000? Do you really think so?
Just listen to that statement. Is he gonna miss $26,000?
Or give Deshaun Watson some type of bonus? Like, and I would obviously object to this, but give Deshaun Watson some type of bonus with a wink idea of, hey, this is the money in which, like just pay him more and say, hey, this is the money that we take it. Like, we're paying you more, but this is the money that we take it. This is like your per diem. We're actually taking this money out for the shenanigans, and they didn't have the people running the team at the time that had sense enough to do that. And so you're talking about really just what we talked about before. Another example, the latest domino effect in a crisis in leadership, which is what they were dealing with. In part of what I thought Deshaun Watson got fed up with in the first place, and it's not just Deshaun Watson, right? He's probably not the perfect example, given how things played out with him. But there are other players who just looked around and were like, J.J. Watt. Other players who looked around and were like, yo, man, I don't know about how we're doing things right now, and I really wish that we could reconnect with our fan base because we've become disconnected for a lot of reasons, right? And a lot of the disconnect was having people in jobs that they didn't have no business in being in. And if you look back at the folks that was running salary, this is a salary cap infraction, okay, by the league, okay, a salary cap infraction imposed by the league that strips you of a 5th-round draft pick and fines your team a measly $175,000. And we can try to make that to be about Deshaun Watson if we want to, but the fact of the matter is, if they had managed that whole thing properly and competently, we wouldn't be hearing about it. And yes, it came out because of the shenanigans with Deshaun Watson. But the reason why they were able to go back and look and say, okay, did y'all even do that right? Okay, because like you said, they're not the only team that's probably doing that. They probably not the only team that did it wrong, but they the only team that had this situation where the block was hot, right? So then you look and say, okay, so did y'all do that right? And the answer was no. Whose job was it to make sure that was done correctly?
Well,
and those people are going. That person is gone. Okay, just to be clear, that was
definitely.
That was the. Let's just name names. That was the Bill O'Brien, Jack Easterby regime, and we know that Jack Easterby had a lot to do with salary cap management and this situation at the hotel. Like that was him and one of the trainers or coaches or somebody like that.
Which, by the way, if you remember. Right when we started looking at Texans, like, what the hell are they doing? Like at the very beginning, one of their first dumb moves was getting rid of the capologist. Remember that?
Speak on it.
You remember that? I think that was at the start of the 2019 season, I believe.
Chris Olsen.
Yeah, the capologist is now here we are.
He had dealt with their salary cap for like almost 20 years, 15 plus years or something like that. I forget the exact years, but he was their long time salary cap guy, and they got rid of him for somebody.
And that was one of their first of several moves.
Well, but replace. It's one thing to get rid of somebody; it's another thing to not replace them properly, right?
Well, hopefully, finally, we are over that era. I'm pretty sure it's going to be little small things that's going to come up between now and this time next year, but. As of right now, hopefully the Houston Texans are in better hands. With that being said, that's going to conclude this latest installment of Locked On Texans. B. Scott, before I let you go, please be sure to let our listeners and viewers know where they can find you at on all your social media platforms. And don't forget to tell them about how you've been killing it on 610 on In the Loop.
Well, of course, y'all know at Brandon K. Scott is where you can find me on Twitter. or hopefully, if you don't know, I'm letting you know, at Brandon K. Scott on Twitter, the B Block Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts every week. And also, like Cody just mentioned, Sports Radio 610. Your boy got some time this week on the air. It's always good to get reps, but it's even better to get a stream of reps, like multiple reps, like not just a day, but several days. You always cherish those opportunities. And I got basically, a week straight, an entire week straight, 5-6 days straight on In the Loop. I'm on there every week, by the way, just so y'all know. I'm on In the Loop every Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Time if y'all want to check me out. But this week I've been fortunate enough to be in for John Lopez the entire week, or the entire 4 hours since Tuesday. We'll be on through Friday and actually through next Tuesday. So if you check this out, say on Friday or over the weekend, I will be on Monday and Tuesday as well. So that's from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Sports Radio 610, the Odyssey app, In the Loop. Check your boy out.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.